That's what it is. Yes, that happens the Sunday before. I'm glad you all are here. So today we finally, we're not hearing about John the Baptist. We finally get to hear about baby Jesus, right? With this story, it's one that we all know, or at least we've all pieced together a version of the story in our head from the different accounts of it. This is one that focuses a little bit more on Joseph. And I want to set the background. You all have all probably heard this before, but I want to remind us. Mary at this point is probably 13 to 15, maybe 16 years old most likely. We don't know how old Joseph is. He could be 40. He could be 20. We really don't know much about him. But we do know that they're in their engagement period. And in that culture at that time, you would be engaged, this marriage would be arranged by your families, or at least agreed to. Arranged might be too strong a word, but certainly they would have a hand in it, and they would certainly have to sign off on it. But at this year, so when they become engaged, they are legally bound to one another, okay? Even though they're still not married. But typically, the bride-to-be would go and live in the groom's home with his family, extended family. They wouldn't share a bedroom or anything, but she would be there living with them, them getting a chance to get to know her and vice versa, because that's where she's going to be living. And so it's during this time. And during that time, if something happens, particularly infidelity, at that point, the penalty for that would be something like a public trial. She would be brought before the whole town, asked questions, asked to explain herself. And one of the potential penalties for that could have been stoning. That was, if she found guilty, she could be stoned, or at the very least, shamed, run out of town. She would never be fit to marry again. And as a single, unwed woman, would have a difficult time making ends meet, not to mention having a child. This is a very precarious situation. And so, in comes Joseph. And we're not told how or when he finds out that she's pregnant. We're only told that he does. She's with child. And so now he has a choice to make. As I said, at that time it would have been considered the righteous or right thing to do to put her on trial, to make her suffer the consequences, if you will, of her actions. But that's not what Joseph does. And that part in and of itself to me is shocking. Right? If any of us were engaged to someone, Laura and I were engaged, she came to us and said, "Oh, I'm pregnant." No, it's not me. So we have a problem. That would have been the situation, right? And most people in that situation would have looked to seek revenge, right? They're going to be angry. They've been hurt. They've been hurt. Yes, I want to call her out at public trial. Yes, I want to see her suffer the consequences of this. She's shamed me. She's embarrassed me. Yes, that's what I want. But that's not the man that we see. And not only would it have been feasible for him to do it, it would have been considered by many the right thing to do. It would have been real easy to convince himself that that was the thing to do. But we're told that he's a righteous man and that he didn't want to put her through that public display. He didn't want to shame her in that way. And that's the piece that I want to focus on, because this tells us something, and almost the only thing that we ever know about Joseph, is that before the angel ever comes, before he knows that he's the stepfather of the Son of God, he's a good man. He's compassionate. He's caring. He's willing to put another's needs ahead of his own. Think about that for a minute. Before God ever calls him to this great task, he's proven himself to be a caring and loving person. Our version, the NRSV, says a righteous. Now, in the New Testament, we use that word righteous a little bit differently typically. Righteousness means being right with God, and that comes through Jesus Christ. But in the Old Testament, which this story was taking place in what we call the Old Testament times, before Jesus was born, for his death and resurrection, this word righteousness meant one who strove to be right with God. It's a word that's not often assigned to people in the Old Testament. Struggling, striving to be right in the face of God. He's a good man. And it's to this good man that comes this great task. To raise the Son of God. So, for today, what I want us to be thinking about is what it means to be prepared to receive God's calling. Because sometimes, if you're anything like me, you sit around and say, well, I could do this or I could do that, or why isn't God calling me to do this or this greater thing or this other thing or this whatever? All the while, I'm not doing a very good job of preparing myself to be the person God needs me to be in that situation. Right? I want God to do all the work. It's like, God, I want you to give me this ministry, but I also want you to do all the work to make me fit for it. Right? I don't really want to have to work at this. But throughout Scripture, we see that's not how it works. When we see descriptions of David and Moses and these other characters from the Scripture, we see people with a heart turned towards God. Not perfect. Not perfect by any means. But with a heart that longs to serve God. And I think that's the transition that we all have to be constantly working towards. It's having a heart that longs to serve God. And I suspect that we've all experienced this in some way in our lives, where we made a decision. We said, I want this to change. It could be something, losing weight. It could be being more kind. It could be working on a relationship in our life. But when we really change our heart and our mind and say, I want this to change, and we're willing to do the work, usually we find change. Usually we find growth. When it's the first thing we think of in the morning and the last thing we think of before we go to bed, when we're constantly saying, I need to work on this, or I can do this, we change. And that's the level of commitment that I believe God is wanting to see in us to do God's will. Now, I'm not talking about being perfect here, but I'm talking about that heart that desires to do what God would have us do. That says, you know what? In this situation right here, I can tell a little white lie. Nobody will ever know the difference. And it's going to help me. Maybe it's going to help some others. That'd be a good thing. No. God says, I want you to strive to do what I'm calling you to do. Or you could convince yourself that being cruel, for lack of a better term, to this person is what they need because they have it coming. God says, no, I need you to forgive. I need you to love. You could convince yourself that, well, I've given enough of my time and my money and things. I don't need to do anymore. I've checked that off the list. God says, no. I want you to do a little more. Point being, simple decisions that we make every day affect how we're approaching righteousness with God. Because ultimately, what it's about is about our hearts, right? I could give you a list of every do and don't that you could possibly imagine, and you could go down and check that and say, I do all these and I don't do any of these. According to this list, I am perfect. But the sad news is, you're no closer to God than you were when you started. Because it's the heart that has to change. It's the heart that has to change. So preparing ourselves to serve God in a powerful way is something we do each and every day. And that call may come next week. It may come next year. It may come 10 years from now. But it's our work. It's our job to prepare ourselves, to make ourselves good and fertile soil to receive that calling. And then go out and do the work we're called to do. And God is with us. God will help us with every bit of that. But we have to be committed to it. We have to want it. First thing in the morning, last thing at night. And every time in between when we're tempted and pulled away. That has to be the desire of our hearts. Let us pray.